Welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the fortnightly podcast all about the Microsoft Cloud. This week, Cyrus is going to open us up on security and governance side. And he has picked a very good week for it because there is a proper governance story to get into. Anthropic has released a new model called Claude Fable 5, and Microsoft has reportedly told its own staff they cannot use it, yet because of the data retention terms attached to it. I find that rather a neat illustration of an AI safety decision turning straight into an enterprise governance problem, and I suspect we'll see a lot more of that coming through. Cyrus has also been through the June refresh of the Microsoft Cybersecurity reference architecture, one of my old favorites haunts from my previous life, along with the usual run of Entra, Intune, Defender, and Purview updates. Then we go to David, who has brought what I can only describe as one of his most eclectic set of links to date, and I'm rather looking forward to watching him try to find the thread that ties them all together. And then I've got just two of my own this week, both out of build, which is probably not to be a surprising announcement. The first is the GitHub Copilot app, which I have a slightly personal interest in for reasons I'll get into. And the second is Project Solara, which I think might be a bit of a surprise, but it's Microsoft's agent-first device platform, which I want to look through at a management and identity lens rather than as a piece of hardware, because I think that is probably where the actual sort of questions for enterprises sit. Anyway, Cyrus, I want to bring you in now because some of the things you've been looking at this week all seem to circle the same problem, which is what happens when capability arrives faster than the controls around it.
Yeah.
So you've got the Claude Fable 5 story, and according to Verge reporting, has restricted its own employees, i.e. Microsoft, from using it. Yeah. And I suppose that, I don't know whether that is a governance thing, because they've also stopped Claude Code usage in Microsoft as well, also according to the Verge. I've not had any confirmation either way. So I don't know whether it might be related to that as well as a governance concern. However, I did use Fable yesterday on a topic. So it is available for anybody within IBM. Sorry to anybody else outside of IBM here that has the GitHub Copilot license. You can sort of start using Fable. Cool. I wouldn't. It's very token heavy. And with the billing changes, that's something that you obviously have to consider as well. But anyway, enough of my digression. What if not even 5 minutes into this week's episodes? So you've also been through the MCRA, which we've talked about, and I'll be interested in see what your views are on what's changed and what's been updated there, because I have not seen that yet. So anyway, Cyrus, enough waffle from me. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. There's a lot to say, so I have, while you were speaking, I was adding notes to make sure that I don't digress. So for the Fable 5 story, so I missed last episode. When we missed last episode here, it's like a month. And I remember last time I was like, I need to talk about Mythos. I was doing about, I don't know how to say Mythos, Mythos. There's a lot of pronunciation, even in the meeting last time with client in IBM.
I think it's Mythos if you've got the English enunciation.
I will go with Mythos then. We had a debate on the pronunciation inside this kind of meeting in IBM. So it was funny. It was not just in my head. So the Mythos is really the one that interests me the most, because one example that you know probably is the new Apple security chip for the phones that was just released. Mythos was used by two I think brother from a company that were doing cybersecurity, and they were able to break that they could find some 0 days. I think 4 or 5 0 days directly. So that's scary, and that's why they build Fable, which always make me remember the game on the Xbox, if you play that game. So Fable 5, which is not an evolution of Opus. It's literally a new model based on a Mythos. And this one comes with a lot of restriction. So if you ask question about cybersecurity, biology, to find a new cell or anything chemistry, it's heavily restricted. So sometimes it will not just answer; it will give you some random abstract answers. So not too excited for me. But the short version for that is that it's extremely capable, especially for complex reasoning, for coding, for scientific work. But as you said, Richard, rightfully, it comes with heavy safety control, and that's those key governance points. Like it's Fable 5 has a mandatory 30 days of retention for prompt on output. So if you use to, for example, zero retention models, this one is not capable. You need the 30 days retention model. And for that, I suggest anyone listening to follow a guy from IBM, not because it's from IBM, but he's very popular in the AI ops. He's an AI ops leader, by the way. He's called Andreas Horn. Probably you guys follow him. And he made actually a good 10 bullet point on what's Fable 5, what it is not, and all these things about governance. But yes, that sounds like they had to restrict that model. It could not be released in public without any restriction. Right, there's a lot to say, but I prefer to stay here unless you have some questions, some comments, because I'm sure you probably have. I've played with it, but for now there's one point. I understood that until the 23rd or 22nd of June, it will be part of your subscription, so you can use it, and it takes a lot of time. But then normally after this date, it should be a credit based. So play with it. You have as of recording 10 days or a few days once that episode will be released.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's certainly available in our GitHub Copilot instances here. It's available in Claude. Obviously, it's available in Claude if you've got the subscription already. And I did use it yesterday, but I'm very conscious that it does probably cost twice as much as the latest Opus model. So I have definitely been restricting it because token usage in Claude is, in my opinion, slightly problematic. Yeah. It does seem to use an awful lot of tokens for things that you wouldn't necessarily think it should do. I'm probably using it wrong, so don't take that as a.
Yeah, that's what I can finish with that. Actually, thank you, Richard. That's a smarter model can still be the wrong model if the governance model does not fit, or actually the cost, and this is very heavy in cost. So.
Again, digression time. So I was talking to some people from GitHub yesterday, and I was actually mentioning this with the auto model selector, and because obviously their recommendation is that if you're asking, say, GitHub Copilot a yes/no question, have I done this? Does this exist? Is there a route to this page, for example? You should be using the smallest model you can do. So their suggestion was to use Haiku for that. Now, quite frankly, I've had very bad experiences using Haiku. Yet the auto picker doesn't seem to follow those same rules. So GitHub's sort of recommendation to me, informally, don't take this as like a formal recommendation, is that you look at the prompt that you're putting into the agent and then you go, okay, right, that's a really simple prompt. I'm going to use Haiku for this one. That's a slightly more complicated one. I'm going to use Sonnet, or I might change the level of it and do Sonnet low or something like that. But then you're constantly having to tweak your model every time you go into to write a prompt, which yes, the auto bit is supposed to help you do, but I don't know. My experience has been that tends to be a little bit weird and not consistent in how it's picking. Yeah. Picking models. And it picks Haiku, for example, for things that it probably shouldn't be picking Haiku for, as an example.
Yeah. Model routers, I think, are going to be the next big thing, because I've been experimenting. So I've been trying to avoid large language models. I've been trying to use local almost exclusively recently with I've got a machine that's got enough RAM to be able to do what I want to do. But I've got the beginnings of a model router doing exactly that, have a small phi model for simple things, very small Quen model for simple coding things, like, how do you do this in Unix? I do that quite a lot, right? Because I'm not primarily a Unix user. So I'm trying to shift all that usage into local models. But then you still need to be able to switch between the models. So I've got an auto that then has sort of mini logic in it that says, well, if this is something complicated, then go to a bigger Sonnet model. And it's not straightforward because you're trying to infer intent, right? And that's always, you need a model in front of the model to work out what the intent is to then pick the right model. I mean, it's like it's endless, isn't it? So
yeah, I'm waiting for the pricing to be announced for the DevBox that Microsoft announced. Was it DevBox? The new NVIDIA device that they announced. I think it's called DevBox, but I could be completely wrong on that.
I forgot the name.
I've got a horrible feeling that's going to be like £5,000 or something like that, and have a massive long waiting list. Thanks to what's the phrase that people are calling RAM apocalypse or something?
Yeah, I think that's 4,000. And I had a chat actually with David about that. It's going to be still worth it if you see how much people use as a token over the year. Or if you use that machine a year intensively, it's my personal opinion. I think it's going to be really worth it. It's expensive, but in the context, it's kind of worth it.
I was going to say that there is a new model router model in Azure Foundry now. It's not made its way into the Foundry local, but I'm hoping it will at some point. So
I have to have a look at that because that's something I'm looking into for another project. Anyway, sorry, Cyrus, we completely derailed your topics.
I hope you jumped in. I'm sorry, there's some noise. Sometimes I have to mute myself, so I apologize for the recording. There's a lot to say, and I know, David, I was thinking of you because you showed me so many of your routers and different optimization, and that's going to be very needed in those coming months because there will be an answer to that. They can't be Anthropic to be alone to release such a powerful thing, especially OpenAI, and Microsoft has to do something too. Anyway, sorry, I digress my own digression. So on the Microsoft side, there is as you introduced, there is architecture update. And we talk about the refresh Microsoft security adoption model, which brings now the security adoption framework and MCRA style guidance in a more structured model. So if you, I know you're a bit like me for that, Richard, every 6 months, every year, sometimes a bit more, sometimes less, there's updates in the MCRA, the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. We love that one. If you love cybersecurity, and Microsoft is probably your favorite slides. And for the first time, they've kept the old link. And I know I'm a bit autistic on that. They kept the old link. So it's still there, the 2025. So if you check like me, or you have like a routine to check every month, you will still see the old version. You have to go into the SAF page, Security Adoption Framework. And they released the new cybersecurity, which is the same one, but as of June 2026. There's they changed, so they kept the old version, of course. So you have like all the zero trust, etc. But the way it's presented is more structured because before it was refragmented. So if, for example, instead of treating zero trust as a list of separate controls, the model now connects 3 layers, and you can see them: business scenarios, security disciplines, and technology pillars. There is of course, because there's 3 protagonists here. There's the leader that talk about business outcomes, classic architects like me now talk about reference architecture, and I will talk about one. And engineers talk about controls. And now they have a shared roadmap. It's easier. The main change that I like, and I'm sure Richard, it will resonate with you, is that they clearly include data as a technology pillar. So we talked about that. We saw some change, Meryl Fernando, etc. So now, finally, data security is not just an appendix to identity. It's literally it has its own place. So it's called. Sorry for the noise. Do you hear that noise, or is okay?
It's fine.
Good. Okay. Perfect. Oh wow, it's really loud. It's called Data Security Reference Architecture. So it has its own slides, and you have. In my opinion, it still require improvement, but that's a good draft for your own presentation, for your bid, for even your own understanding on how to use Purview, how everything connects. So it's really important they do that, because I had to do my own data security reference architecture. So now it's there and it's ready for the AI era. And I think that this makes Purview much easier to explain to leaders, because we know it's not a compliance portal. We keep repeating that here. It becomes part of a security architecture. You have identity, endpoints, now data, AI, investigation, governance. All of that is connected. Yeah, so that's it for the Microsoft MCRA part. If I have 5 more minutes, I can go to Entra and Intune, if that's okay, or I can stop here because I know we digressed a lot. For Entra, there are 2 changes I think people should watch. The first one is system preferred authentication expanding to first factor. Until now, many users will enter a password first. Then the system will choose the strongest MFA method available. And that sounds really normal, but if you did level 1 support, or if you help people on what's passkey, or I heard your podcast with Richard and David Cyrus, I've never tried the passwordless, and I try, but you said to us that we have to, because I said that on the podcast, and I said that I just quote Microsoft documentation that now the best practice is to create a long password that the user will forget, not even store in the one password or stuff, you will forget, and you will exclusively use FIDO2 kind of like connection, passwordless, or Windows Hello for Business. But in the practicality, it's not true, because you still at some point asked the user the password and then choose the MFA. So now, by default, it will detect if you already set up when you join the company or when you did that routine, it will choose the strongest MFA method directly. So I'm happy it's done by default, so you have nothing to do. The second one is there's a change as of, so the deadline is July 6th, so in 1 month, around conditional access for register security information. So this is important for organizations that is moving from Windows Hello for Business and macOS platform SSO. So when they move into that one, registration flows for these credentials will also need to satisfy conditional access grant controls configured for security information registration. That was mouthful, I'm sorry. That's good, because now when you register directly from those native platform SSO on Mac or Windows Hello for Business, from that you can you will need to onboard FIDO2 or anything. So you need, for example, to be in a trusted location. So if you have Entra, not private access, but Entra internet access from your licenses, if we talk about E7 comes with that. So it will be all natively integrated as of July 6th. But also it means that if you didn't change your help desk guidance as of July 6th, your user will call you a lot. And if you want to go to vacation, July 6th is a funny date for that. I'm trying to filter out not important news. There's some Intune news, but this one is not interesting, honestly. It's a micro address randomization for a macOS Wi-Fi profile. So if you use random MAC address, I know we do that by default sometimes for good reason. There's no hidden reason. But many enterprise networks still rely on stable device identity for NAC, Wi-Fi allow list troubleshooting. So this gives admins a clean way to choose enterprise controls where the network needs it. So you can disable that, by what I'm saying. So with Intune, you can disable this MAC address randomization. Until now, we had to rely on filter, on scripts. And the second one, if you have worked in a factory, it will make sense. But now I talked about zero trust and FIDO, it will not make sense. Is the Android Enterprise gets a new setting to block Bluetooth sharing. So that one can mess your FIDO2 or connection, so it's not for the normal users. But if you work with a corporate-owned device into like a factory in a kiosk mode, the shared devices, that's very important to avoid data leakage. That's one of the. There's a lot of proof of concept that now is public. You can just escape that information with Bluetooth, and it's almost undetectable. Yeah. I think I'll stop here because I have a list of news, but I think it's going to be too long.
No worries, Cyrus, and thank you very much for going through that. Now, David, I looked at your links this week, and I thought, okay, there's a lot of things here that are very different, broad. I don't know what the word is to describe it, but in effect, you've got what have you got in there? You've got a VS Code extension, a set of composable reference architectures for Azure AI Foundry, a security methodology article, an icon browser, and a piece of software process theory. So I'm really, really intrigued here at the moment of how you're going to pull those together, because you say you do have a thread between all of them. So anyway, David, over to you to give us that thread.
I know, and I feel like I'm cheating on Microsoft Research because I haven't done a research article for a while.
No, I'm missing the Microsoft Research articles.
So I'm going to have to do that. So yeah, so a bit more of a thought piece, I guess, than I've done in the past. But let's run through it. And I would say, based on past experience, if you ask most teams what slowed down their last AI project, right? I think there is a fairly consistent list coming out now. The model wasn't quite right. Well, actually, the latency was the problem, or our context window was too small, or our outputs are inconsistent. Almost nobody says we couldn't describe what we wanted clearly enough for the AI to do anything reliable with it. And I think that, in my experience at the moment, is almost the actual answer, even if people don't actually say it. And I think the interesting problem, and to your point, every single thing that I've got today is kind of circling this from a different perspective, a different angle. And it's us, right? And specifically our ability to describe what we want in enough precision that AI can do something useful with it. And we've spoken about it a lot over the many last podcasts. We over the last few years, we've been asking, I'm going to add the word generative in there, is the generative AI good enough yet? And we know the answer is yes. I mean, even the conversation, Mythos and all the new models, right? The answer is yes. And the question that I think has replaced it is a bit harder and a bit more uncomfortable, which is, but are we good enough yet, right? And that shows up, I think, in specific places. It shows up in how we scope security assessments, because it turns out scoping for an AI agent requires a level of precision that most scoping conversations have never had to reach before, right? I think it shows up in how we brief our development agents, because context and framing matters in ways that I guess what's the phrase? Seat of the pants prompting. I quite like that, actually. Yeah, seat of the pants prompting. That's never really surfaced before. And it shows up in how we write down what we want, which sounds super simple until you try and do it carefully and realize that most specifications are actually a first guessed dressed up as a plan. So that's the thread running through today's set. And I think it's an interesting conversation. It's a more interesting conversation than the capability one, right? Because it's not as resolved. It's ongoing right now, and partly, I guess, because this conversation is the one that actually determines whether any of this is going to land in practice. So, my first two things that you touched on, right? They come from more or less the same corner of Microsoft, and they sort of come at something from two different directions and arrive at exactly the same conclusion, which is why I thought it was quite interesting. So HVE Core which stands, oh my God, I've forgotten the acronym, HVE.
Hypervelocity engineering.
Thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue. HVE Core is a Visual Studio Code extension from Microsoft ISE, Industry Solutions Engineering, which, is that a part of ISD? I'm not actually sure. Is it a new bit?
No, I don't think they're part of ISD. And I should know this because I'm actually working with them at this moment in time, which is an interesting experience for both teams because they are technically supposed to be client focused as opposed to partner focused. So that we're having some interesting clashes of ideas around how things should work and do things. But anyway, carry on.
Very, very interesting. So yes, as you just said, right, this is a bit of Microsoft that kind of does real delivery work with enterprise customers, and it turns out IBM. Cool. And rather than building Lego brick components, or if you want to use posh words, products for a catalog, I think it implements what they call a RPI workflow, so research, plan, and implement. And the insight behind that is fairly straightforward, but it's quite easy to undervalue. So when you, well, we all know, right? When you drop an AI agent into a development task without the proper context or structure, you get something that performs well on average, and then, dare I say, poorly on the things that actually matter the most, because the agent has no reliable picture of the standards that you care about, the constraints you are operating within, and the shape of the system that it's contributing to, or even what looks, what does good look like in that particular domain. So HVE Core's answer to this is collections, a curated bundle of artifacts that give agents that context before they actually doing work. And to give some numbers, I think from a security perspective, they've got something like 61 artifacts, I think, project planning 80 odd, coding standards 20 odd, ditto for data science, I think there's 20 odd there. Design thinking, they've got, again, 20 odd, and these span things like, and they've got other things, right? So ADO, GitHub, and Jira backlog templates. So I think the research phase of the RPI workflow is not just one of those tick box things that you have to do, right? We need to do some research. It's a step where you load the right context so that everything that follows is then grounded rather than guessed. And as we know, that is the super important thing with the AI agents. And I think the word that we would want to hold, I think, close to ourselves in the context of HVE Core is before, right? Structure before writing code, context before invocation. That's the discipline that this tool is trying to industrialize. And as we said, it's coming from people who have hopefully had enough delivery engagements to kind of know what it means if we don't do that. And I think IBM is actually pretty good at doing this as well, but it's nice to see it come from Microsoft. And then if you look at CAIRA, I think that's how you say it. We had this conversation.
Yeah, that's how it's been pronounced in the calls that I've been on is CAIRA.
Yeah. And it kind of comes at the problem, but from the other side. So where HVE Core structured the sort of, I guess, human AI development workflow, CAIRA, the acronym, is the composable AI reference architecture. It structures the architecture of AI systems themselves when you deploy them, right? So again, from Microsoft, again on GitHub, and this is doing the real work. They've got composable modular components that sort of fit your actual situation rather than, dare I say, just accepting a big monolithic stack that's designed for an averaged out scenario. And we see that a lot, right, where we must have an AI landing zone, and then that AI landing zone just becomes a mass of stuff trying to span every scenario, right? And it gives, I guess, an opinionated architecture for deploying these AI systems using AI Foundry, using Terraform, config, and opinionated is always good, but modifiable is better, and that's what it is. So, you think of the connection between those two things. It's not just thematic. CAIRA has this hyper velocity engineering development section that explicitly cross-references HVE Core, so they're designed to be used together, which is obviously why I've picked them. And if I were to recap, one will structure how your team builds with AI. The other structures the AI systems that you're deploying together. They sort of represent a pair of scaffolds at different layers, obviously both pointing up the same direction. So thought that was interesting. So the other thing that I was going to talk about, which is a article that a chap called Lenny Zeltster, I spotted on LinkedIn. So was it Twitter? It might have been Twitter actually. And I think he published it in March, and he's done a few actually. One giving example templates for security assessments, which is quite nice. Community give back and all that stuff. So kudos to him. And it was the one I was reading was called Scope Security Assessments for Attack Paths, not Organizational Charts. And that's the thing that caught my eye. So there's always an AI angle, right? And that comes later, but it's more about sort of the human aspect of this again. So when I use the royal we, when we sit down to scope a security assessment, we reach for the maps that we already have, right? The organization chart, the infrastructure diagrams, the CMDB, if we actually have one that's worth trusting. That's another conversation. These are the things that, in an organization feel authoritative, but at the same time, they become sort of the boundaries as well, right? And you test the web application and you stop at what the edge of the app team owns. You file findings and you sort of move on. And the problem is none of these, dare I say, maps describe how a attacker thinks. Attackers don't care about what permissions are owned by the cloud platform, how the service account is provisioned, all those things. Nobody cares about that. I think it's understanding that there is a single coherent path, and the only reason it looks like two separate problems is because of how we've organized our teams, right? And I know that's not a new observation to pen testing, but I think the Zeltzer makes an interesting point about what it means for AI. And we've seen this with Mythos, and I think we've seen this in spades with Mythos, right? When an AI agent runs a security assessment, it follows the scope that was given literally for the models that we're working with. And I think that's the delta with Mythos, because it kind of takes its own knowledge and does the things that we are our unconscious bias, our bias, I'm not sure, that prevents us from doing those things, right? So in that instance, the AI is good, but we've still got humans trying to direct the AIs in these instances. So I think it's worth being mindful, because we need to move from that organizational language to attack path language, and I don't think we're doing that, right? I think we're trying to, but I don't think we've quite evolved, and we're relying on the model now to do that. But again, the human bit, shouldn't we understand how it's doing so much better? How is Mythos, looking at things differently without those biased views, because surely that's a good thing for us to start thinking that way, because there's clearly an issue there, right? Based on all the CVEs and all the fixes and everything that's coming out. So there's a human thing to fix there. We shouldn't just rely on the model. Personal opinion. And take a slip of coffee. Feel free to say something.
No, I agree.
Good. The next thing I was going to talk about is just a super useful thing, right? msicons.com. Community built. There's a chap, I forget his name, Daniel Brady. He's an MVP, and he has pulled together 2,455 architecture icons across Azure, Entra, 365, Power Platform. All searchable, all free, not official Microsoft. Gone are the days when you used to have all those lovely Visio icons. But if you create architecture diagrams, documentation, whatever, go look at them. They're super helpful. I love that sort of thing.
Does that chap still maintain that GitHub repo where he had all the icons? I can't remember his name now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not
I
sure.
remember.
But this one seems one of the better ones that I found recently. So
Yeah.
No, I'm just having a quick look, and yes, that I will bookmark that one.
Super. Right, and then my last thing, which was it was a Medium article. Thankfully, the person had click here if you haven't got a Medium subscription, so I was actually able to read it. I am very thankful for the people that do that. I'm not quite sure how they do it, but I don't pay for it. But there is some good stuff there, and he is Kapil Viren Ahu. I don't know. I apologize for butchering your name if you ever hear this, but anyway, he calls something which is intent-driven specification development, IDSD, and I think for me it sort of neatly closes the loop on everything that I've spoken about so far. And the backstory is this, the whole vibe coding thing. We've described what we wanted. We've let know how I generated, and they never quite scale past early experiments. And so people then, and I've spoken about this, right? People then go in the other direction and say, well, let's go for specifications. Let's create specifications. Let's do spec-driven development. You've got, that's gained quite a lot of momentum. You've got the Microsoft, I think, and GitHub spec kit. There are similar versions. You've got AWS Kiro. There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? And the logic was, and I get it, right, because it's quite a human thing again. Write a complete specification first, and then use that to drive the AI-assisted development discipline through documentation. As an architect, yes, why wouldn't you, right? And the interesting thing, the article's argument is that spec-driven development, SDD, has, I guess, inherited a problem almost as old as software engineering as a practice, right? So, which is when you write a complete document up front before the work, before real feedback, before, dare I say, the actual complexity of the problem is understood, it's actually a failure mode that iterative methods have been arguing against since, I guess, the 1950s, right? The chaps, what are they called, Lahman and Basil, I think, traced it, in IEEE in 2003. And specification becomes a constant rather than a guide, and particularly when the thing you're building is, dare I say, genuinely novel. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment, right? Or the client's understanding what they need is... This never happens, right? It evolves during the engagement. Would that happen? No, it would never happen. So I think the IDSD's fix to this is to start from intent. What outcome does the client actually need, and let the specification emerge and refine iteratively through the engagement. So, that's sort of agile, right? The detail arrives as the work generates them, and the spec becomes this living artifact and not simply a contract signed at the beginning. And that's what spec kit does, right? Spec kit is very much, this is the contract, these are the things, these are the tasks. And I think, there's a line from what he says that I thought resonated. And he says that IDSD ends, I need to read this, ends somewhere the saying, so never did, on the client's invoice. And I had to read that several times because the English doesn't quite work for me. So I sort of sat with it for a bit. And I think what he means is people have been criticizing document first, spec heavy development for decades, right? The academic literature is full of that. And the iterative methods community have been making this argument for years, as I said. But critiquing the approach has never actually produced an alternative the client could actually pay for in a meaningful way. So the saying so never ended in a deliverable, as he says. And IDSD's claim is that by staying anchored to intent throughout rather than to the document, you keep moving forwards. You move forwards towards something real rather than towards something complete, right? I've completed the design document. I've completed the low-level design. I've completed the spec. I've completed, right? You get it. Rather, you move to, I've shipped something real. I've shipped something real. I've shipped something real. And ultimately then, the invoice is the proof. Somebody's willing to pay for what you've done as opposed to willing to just pay for a document. So I think that was quite a nice way of doing it, although it took me a few reads to actually get to that. And, now think about what that means for HVE Core, right? The RPI workflow, research, plan, implement. It's not spec first. It's intent first. And, I think if you think about those together, they're both responses to the same failure mode, which is structure means writing everything down before you start. And I think real structure is knowing when to commit to what and doing the research that makes that commitment worth something, right? So really, really interesting. And I think that's all my topics, actually. If I'm honest, I sort of struggled to find the right words to close this segment because, other pods where we're just super excited about what research is doing or a new tech thing, right? And it's because it's one of those more sort of uncomfortable versions of the conversation. Everything I've said today is work that falls to us. And I guess I worry a bit that most of us aren't doing it yet. But equally, I suppose that's absolutely the more interesting place to be, right? At the beginning of figuring something out rather than just watching it pass us by. So, yeah, Richard, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, we've been sort of architects, and I still remember the days, and this not that long ago, where you would do a HLD and an LLD right at the start of the project, obviously based off of a load of workshops and interviews and documentation. And then there was always the argument, I think, at the time of whether you do sort of that waterfall type approach or you go in agile. But agile always seems to, in my experience, not because of the agile methodology or the way that agile is supposed to work, but more the way that people implement agile, which is basically let's just write some stuff and see what happens.
Yeah.
They're seeing. I've spoken to a number of people that there's no documentation in Agile, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but in the Agile methodology is something along the lines of documentation has a purpose, but it should only be used basically for that purpose. You're not writing documentation just because you've been told you need to write some documentation. And that documentation could just be a bunch of screenshots or pictures of a whiteboard or whatever it might well be. But as long as it's serving some sort of architectural purpose, I've always wondered whether there's a middle ground somewhere between those two sort of extremes. I don't know. There might well be a framework out there that I haven't come across and probably should have come across. But it does come to play, I think, in AI development. Especially, I mean, you've mentioned spec kit, so I've been using spec kit for a couple of weeks now. I know late to the party on that, but there was a reason why I was using it, which comes actually into my topic that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. And the struggle that I'm having at the moment, and I think this is a conceptual struggle coming to the AI piece of this, is you have to be able to structure your prompts in the way that gets the meaning and the context that you want to give to the agent in a manner that the agent can understand and fully understand. And I think that is an alien mechanism, process, whatever you want to call it, for a lot of people, because you have to think in a certain way. And some people will probably do it very naturally. But other people are going to be struggling because they want to use flowery language or be descriptive around feelings or something else about what something should look like.
Right, that's a really good one.
Yeah. Which doesn't work because you have to be very, very, very sort of specific. This text box has to be in this location, equidistant from this one, and it has to be this way around. And I ran into that problem when I can't remember whether I showed you, David, on one of the weekly meetings that we have. So I've created which is now redundant almost, an orchestration tool for vibe coding. So what you do is you basically go, here's my big blurb of what I want to achieve for this particular session, stick it into the tool, and then the tool tries to decompose that into individual tasks. Ideally, the smallest possible task it can get away with. So then you've got slightly more trust that it's actually going to do what you say it's going to do. But that breakdown from the descriptive element into actually, you need to create an issue, and that issue does X, Y, and Z, or just even X, but it also has to relate to this issue, which is doing Y, and this issue which is doing Z. That was a challenge, and I don't think I've got anywhere near resolving that particular challenge yet, of taking something that's much more free form into that sort of spec piece. And then, of course, you then have to iterate over it. So you do it once and you might not get the result that you want, or someone says, oh, actually, hang on a second, that's not quite what I meant when I was talking to you about, feature A, whatever it is. So that, I think, is a challenge that I don't know whether we've got any visibility on how to actually fix. I mean, HVE and CAIRA, spec kit, they're all frameworks to help that, especially with context, because context is king for this. Helping, but I don't think they're helping that fundamental issue of what does the system look like, or in your head, to getting it into the final state accurately. And the reason why I was sort of saying this is related to what I wanted to talk about this week, is because for about a week now, possibly a bit longer, I've been using the new GitHub Copilot app. Not to be confused, which I did the first time round, with the new GitHub app, or at least the slightly revised version of the GitHub app, because I downloaded that, went, hang on a second, that's not what it's supposed to look like or do, and I realized I downloaded the wrong one. Now, what's interesting about this, and where it sort of clashes with what I was looking at doing, is that you can set up, or at least you can configure it or use it to work on multiple sessions against the same project code at the same time. And it does this by using worktrees in GitHub, which means that you can work on the same repo for basically, safely from two different or multiple different places. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still a little bit.
It does claim that you can merge them, but I've not experimented with that yet.
So I'm not entirely sure how that's working. I've tried it. The difference between what I was trying to do and what GitHub Copilot has implemented is the fact that I was able to sort of structure mine in more, okay, I'm going to have this session. It's going to have these 5 work streams, and I can sort of say what's going to happen. Here, you're sort of going into one work stream, going, oh, this is my prompt here, go and run it. Then you're going into another one. This is my prompt here, go and run it. Obviously, they're on different work trees, so you can't view the result in the same browser window.
It's like five different developers all working on a different branch, right?
Precisely. So then you have to manage the sort of merge and the pull request back into whatever branch it is that you're using to view the outputs, which it was a little bit of a faff. And certainly from the way that I use it, the canvas panel seems like a good idea. But because I basically have my screen set up with a browser, like 2/3 of the screen, and then the GitHub Copilot app or VS Code, like in that other 1/3, primarily focused around the chat interface, it keeps wanting to open the canvas. No, I don't want the canvas. Go away. I just want the chat window because that's all I use. So I did actually, for a brief period of time, like last week, go to the CLI for both Copilot and for Bob. So I was using the, I think it's called Bob Shell for anybody that's interested, and obviously the Copilot CLI, because that got rid of all the sort of screen real estate that I wasn't really using. But obviously you can't, unless you spin up multiple CLIs, you can't get the same experience. Anyway, so that's out. I think it's restricted to people that have got a paid GitHub license. So if you don't have one of those, I don't think you can get it yet. I'm not sure if they are going to plan to roll it out at the moment, but so it's available to IBMers, really. But anybody else, you might just need to check the references and around what you can access with your plan. Now, the last thing I wanted to cover off here was a build announcement, but probably not a build announcement that people would potentially think that I would pick up on. And that is Project Solara. I'm probably just called it the old Sun Systems name there. And that struck me as being a really interesting. Is it a diversion from Microsoft? I don't know whether it is a diversion from Microsoft. But basically, Project Solara is a framework for hardware devices, I suppose, for putting agents on top of them. And the demo they ran through at Build, I don't know whether any of you two have seen that as part of the keynote. So I'm going to ignore the little desktop thing they had, because that just struck me as being a slightly fancy Stream Deck. And I think hands up who on this call or in this thing who's got a Stream Deck. So I certainly have. David has and Cyrus has. So I'm not sure. But the identity card they showed was quite interesting. Anyway, the premise basically, for those that haven't seen this, is it's a device where AI agents do the work instead of you opening an app. So there's no app store, there's no browser, there's no real desktop, etc. So when I was looking at this, outside of the device stuff, is how you're going to manage something that basically is running something called MDAP, which is Microsoft Device Ecosystem Platform, which is a fork of Android. So it's a bit of a mixture for Microsoft. And their vision for their AI future is going to be running on Android. But anyway, as I said, they showed 2 concept devices, a wearable smart badge with 5G, a camera, voice, and a desk companion, as I said, which looks very much like the Stream Deck. They were quite clear these are reference designs, not products Microsoft intends to build. So the usual stack of partners, Qualcomm, MediaTek, etc. But idea is that the device makers build the actual hardware from Microsoft's reference designs. So not quite like what they were doing with Surface, which I think Surface was like an exemplar, wasn't it? But anyway, here is why I did not want to treat these as a gadget segment, because underneath the concept, Solara ships with Intune for device management, Entra for identity, and Hello for Business for biometrics.
Oh, cool.
So Microsoft is basically saying this is a new and rather strange endpoint for which is appless device that an agent operates on your behalf, and you will manage it with exactly the same tooling you're already using for everything else. Now, I think that's an interesting question for the audience here, for us, which is, what does an agent-first endpoint do to your identity model? So if the device's whole job is to let an agent act for the user, then your conditional access policies and your data loss prevention rules, which all quietly assume a person sitting behind the session, start to look a little bit iffy. So, I mean, I don't have answers here, and I'm hoping that Microsoft does, because it is just a concept stage. But I think that is a very important question to sort of answer. And I will note, because this is sort of close to where I'm working at the moment, is the target verticals Microsoft listed include financial services, retail, healthcare. So this is not purely sort of like a warehouse scanner story. Someone has to manage these things inside regulated environments, which is precisely where all the IDAM and governance questions come to life and become an important piece. And yes, I know that we've got things like Agent 365 and the Entra components in here, but I'm still wondering whether people are not necessarily considering how that is going to work within an enterprise. However, having said that, the badge scanner thing, because as I think a few people know here, I've fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, had to spend a lot of time in hospitals recently. Not for me, but for other things. And I could see a really good use case for that if the privacy and governance questions were answered. Anyway, so I think a slightly different take on that, possibly from what was there. I think it's really interesting, and I'll be very, very intrigued to see where it goes from here. But yeah, we're coming back down to how do we govern and how do we make sure that whatever agentic workflow we've got, whether it's on a third-party device or anything else, needs to be really, really considered, and there has to be a good, robust solution for there, which I might well talk about in the next pod, because there is a private preview, or is it a public preview now, of something that we can probably talk about in the next episode, which might be interesting for some of these elements. Anyway, I think that is... oh, no, I was going to have one more point on this one, actually. I was talking to somebody internally, so at IBM, and they made an interesting point, which I hadn't really cottoned on to, is that nobody was calling these IoT devices.
Funny.
And I thought that was weird, because certainly I think that, okay, the desk device you could possibly argue wasn't, but the identity card is almost a classic definition, I think, of an IoT device. But I don't know if it was just me and this chap, but I don't think IoT was mentioned once in that segment.
It's weird because they have all the suite of protection for the IoT, Defender for IoT. They have like a whole point of view on that, and it is an IoT. It's the definition. Like weird.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting point he made, and it hadn't clicked with me. But then when I looked back at it and went, he's right. Why wasn't IoT mentioned in there? So yeah, we'll see. But anyway, that was enough from me. And I think that's it from us for this week. As always, if you are getting something out of these episodes, please subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. Leave us a review, put some comments in the relevant platform, especially if you've run into any of these in a real environment, because this is the bit we cannot get from, a blog post or watching a build video or something like that. Anyway, enough from me. Thank you as always to Cyrus and David, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.